first thing is, of course, I do the void setup and the void draw. And I make my screen size like this. Wow, really nice empty screen on the right size. That, of course, yes. Let's switch back. Why it doesn't do that directly? Okay. What else to do? Well, I want to draw some buttons. So I'm starting to make a button class. So I will make a new tab. I call this a button class button, and I will make the constructor button. And in the end, I also want to show the button on the screen, so I make a display function. Okay. So now I have a button. Well, first start small. Let's draw something. I know already a lot of commands out of my head, and in this way, the basic drawing functions of processing are not so difficult. Otherwise, always check the language reference, because you can find a lot of information. In this case, I'm just going to use the rect function to draw a rectangle. You can even do a nice rounded button if we wanted, but I start plain and simple. So let's draw a rectangle, and I want to have 4 buttons, so I can say like, well, I start a rectangle at 0, 0, and actually the width of the screen divided by 2, and the height of the screen divided by 2. So I have this button. Of course, I want to give it a fill with a certain color, and I can say like, well, I want red, I want yellow, I want blue, and I want green. I can type that like this, fully red. I can also put the hexadecimal value. And this is a nice red button. Okay, so this is something that I will probably need in my display function. The only thing is like, okay, I want, let's see how the order is of the Simon game. I forgot it again. So we have green, red. So I can copy paste this. This one should be green. And this one starts at the width divided by 2. It's the red one. Let's check it. If I did it right. Yes. And then let's check again. Oh, I did it wrong again. No, green, red, and then this one is then the blue one. And the yellow one. And the yellow one is 0. Like this. Wow, that's a nice Simon game. Okay, it doesn't do anything though. So I will, but now you have a bit of an impression how to draw shapes on the screen. And the nice thing about object-oriented programming is that I can do this in the buttons as well. So first let's make some buttons. Button 1. And then I say here in the setup, button 1 is new button. So now I have a new button object, and I can say like, well, I can copy paste this code already to the display function. Okay, that's nice. So let's see if I can make that that work. Which one I copied? Yeah. So instead of doing this, I can say button1.display. Let's see if that works. Still 4. Yeah, it worked. So well, I can make a second button. And display it as well. Okay, it displays properly, but it has the same properties. So now it's time to decide, like, okay, what do I want to pass to the button? Because a button has certain properties. In this case, it has a color and it has a certain position on the screen. So let's pass that information, because that's information that you only want to use one time. Let's pass that in the constructor. So I will say, like, well, I have an X position, I have an Y position, and I have a size, and I have a color. Let's see. Well, the idea is that you use those parameters here in the display function. Well, if you pass those parameters in the constructor, you need to copy them to variables that are globally valid in the button class. So I will make some variables over here, and I say, like, float my X, float my Y, float my size, and color my color. And I need to pass this local variables into those ones, and maybe it's better to use a different name. Then I use the temporary number, so it's clear that this only exists temporary. Temp size, temp color. My X will be the temp X, then my Y is the temp Y, my size is the temp size, and my color is the temp color. Okay, let's see if this program runs. No, I get an error because it says, like, well, the constructor Simon button is undefined. That's indeed true, because the constructor now expects 4 parameters. So when I make the button, I have to already define some properties. So in this case, the first button had an X position of 0, Y position of 0, and it had a width and a height. And you see that the width and the height, because the screen is 600 by 600, is all the time the same. So I can just say, like, well, I make it 300, then I'm done. I can also say, like, well, I divide the width, divided that by 2, then it scales accordingly to the screen if I later make the screen bigger or smaller. Just use 300 right now, and I pass a color to it. So I will say this color, green. Well, let's make the red button then as well. So the red button had an X position of 300, and it had an I of 0. It has also a size of 300, and it has, what else? Yeah, the color is of course red. And you can argue if you need to pass the size, because the size for all the buttons is the same. So does that need to be a variable? And that's what you have to decide later on. So let's see, I will hide this one as well. So let's see if we still have a nice display. Okay, the red button went wrong because white went wrong. Let's see. yeah, I didn't do anything with those variables yet. So of course I have to change the display function. I have to say like, well, for the fill, now you have to use my color. And rectangle, you have to draw on my X, my Y, my size, and again, my size, like this. And yes, we have it working. So, well, now I can do the same trick. So I can say like, well, I have a button 3. It's a new button. And button 4. It's also a new button. And button 3 will be the yellow one. It will have an eye position of 300. And button 4. Sorry, the X has to be 0 of this one. Button 4 was the blue one. And there's a mistake. Yeah, because it doesn't exist. Button 3 cannot be resolved as a variable. And I have 4 buttons. Okay, so I can remove all this code. Well, this is nice to make buttons like that, but you see I get a lot of variables. And in case I wanted to have, well, the Simon game is 4 buttons, so this is usable. But let's say if I want to make a Simon game with 8 buttons or 16 buttons, well, I get a really long list of variables. So I'm going to use an array for the button. So I say like button, buttons. Sorry, I have to declare it as an array, so I do the opening and closing brackets. Array of the name with the name buttons is new button. So now I make an array of the type button. It's a bit confusing because this new button is not the same as this new button. And the difference is in the opening brackets and the parent over here. So this is really the constructor, and this is just the constructor of an array that can be loaded with buttons. Okay, so I can say like, well, I remove these buttons like this. Now I get an error because they don't exist anymore. So I can now use a for loop, and especially if you use a lot of objects, it might be smart to use a for loop to generate different buttons. Well, now these buttons are kind of absolute, so I don't want to use a for loop over here, but in a draw function, I would like to use a for loop. So let's start with that. And if you don't remember, like, okay, how was it to use a for loop? We can just check for, and where I see it, a for loop. And here you see different ways of using for loops. And most of the time you start with a certain number with an I, and you add something to it. And you see that there are different ways to write it. The initialization, the test, the update. Well, I won't explain the whole for loop. So let's make a for loop of this one. For int y0, I is smaller than the buttons dot length I plus plus. Another thing what you can do is this. You can have an integer. Let's try that out. But it's not. We don't have an integer I, but we have now a button. Current button. buttons. So now I can say current button dot display. Let's see if that worked. Yeah, okay. I get here still an error because I don't fill the array. So what I do right now is I say like, well, this is actually the first index. So I will say like 0, button 0, the first index will be the first button, 2, 3. Oh yeah, buttons this has to be buttons. Okay, let's see. Yeah, and I have displayed the buttons. So this is really a shorter way of writing a for loop. Button, current button, and the array button. So this for loop in this way walks through the whole array. You don't have to say array length and everything. So that's a shorter way to write this. So I can remove this. So you see already I have now a bit shorter code already because I worked with a button. Okay, well, so we have the buttons. Let's make them interactive. And the first thing to start with is that I would like to have them respond on the mouse. I want to change the color when I'm well, when I press. I can say like, well, if I press it, it needs to light up, and otherwise it's darker. Well, you see that the color is now really bright and saturated. So actually, I want to have a color that's a bit more dark, and a color that's more light. So let's see what I can do. I can say like, well, I have this parameter, I have the temp color. I can say like, well, I can pass another color parameter. I can also say like, well, I do a calculation based on this color. So I can add a variable, for example, that I say like color my dark color. And let's see if this, and then I say like, well, my dark color. And then the dark color I have to get from the temporary color. So yeah, that's a bit of trick. Like, okay, how are we going to do that? Well, let's see what kind of functionalities processing has built in. So I will say like color. Okay, we have for things we have color modes. Well, that might be a suggestion to use saturation and brightness, and you tweak the brightness a bit. I can get certain components, but this is an interesting function. Lure color, of course I prepared this already, so I know that. Because with lure color you can blend from one color to another color, and you so you have the from color, the to color, and you have the blend amount. And with a lerp, that's a linear interpolation. It's always a number between 1 and 0. So I will make the dark color with the lerp color. So I just copy paste this, and I say like lerp color. Well, the first color is in this case I want to have it black. So I can say color 0. In the end I can also say 0. That works as well. And then my color. And the amount, well, let's take 0.5. So, okay, so I have now a dark color. Let's see if I don't get any errors. Just run it. Yeah, it works. So if I would like to display now my dark color, I can say like, instead of this my color fill, I say like my dark color. And indeed the colors are a bit darker. Okay. So that's nice. So this is an easy way to do in the constructor. You pass a certain color and you say like, well, the color, my dark color. So in the constructor you can initialize more variables in an automated way. Okay, the next thing what I would like to do is, like, for example, if I press the mouse, that my color changes. Well, in processing you have two possibilities. You can use a variable mouse pressed. So you can say, for example, if mouse pressed. That's a possibility. Well, let's show what it does. I just use a print line, pressed the mouse. So if I run this program like this, and I have to turn off this little program. If I press the mouse, you see that it prints here in the console that information. And you see when I keep the mouse pressed, it says like press, 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 pressed. Okay. That's because the draw is actually a loop. So the draw is automatically called 60 times a second by default. There's also a mouse pressed event. Void mouse pressed. And if I do the print line at that point, I see that I keep my mouse pressed right now, and it doesn't call multiple times. The mouse pressed event is only called when I press the mouse, and otherwise not. Okay, so that's so I will use the mouse pressed event for this case, because that makes programming later easier if we are going to work with tones and everything. We have also a function called mouse released. Void mouse released. Show that work pressed, released, pressed, released. Yeah, so I know that also when I release my mouse. Okay. So let's see if we can do something based on that. I have my display, and actually what I want to do is that on the moment that I press my mouse, that I change the color. So I can say like, well, my button has actually two states. It has a state that the light is on, and it has a state that the light is off actually. And when the light is off, it shows the dark color, and if the light is on, it shows the normal color. So I will introduce another variable for this, and that's a Boolean, because there are actually two states. So a Boolean can be true or false, and I can say like, well, if the Boolean is light on, I do something, and if the light is off, I do something. So I can say in this case, if light on is true, pay attention. I say is, but actually it's equal to true. You don't have to say it like this. If you say it like that, it checks for true. If light is on, then I will use my color as a fill. Else, I will use the dark color as a fill. So let's see if I say like, okay, by default I had the light. No, I don't do that in the constructor. Like what I expect to see now is that I see the dark colors. So I will run my program. And indeed I have the dark colors here. Let's turn on this one again. So the background is not so distracting. And if I do this to true, I see all the light colors. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is actually like, okay, yeah, I want to press my mouse and to change the light on parameter of a button. So I can do that over here. I can say, for example, let's do that for one button. First button, buttons, sorry, 0, and then I can say is light on is true, and otherwise buttons 0, of course, as well, is light on is false. Let's see what it does. And it responds to my click. Okay, that's nice. But of course I want to do this, yeah, depending on which button is pressed. So yeah, how do I know which button is pressed? Because if I'm here, it reacts as well, and here it reacts, and here it reacts. So I need to program a kind of a mouse over functionality. So I want to see, like, okay, is my mouse within the ranges of this one? Is my mouse within the ranges of this button, in the ranges of this button, and in the range of this button? So I need to program a function for that. At least that's the thing I'm going to do. I make the default false again. So I will make a function that checks if we are over the mouse, and I make it a special function. I make it a function that returns a value. It returns false if we are not within the if we're not over the button, and it returns true if we're over the button. So say like boolean is mouse over. And well, then I have to check, like, okay, when I'm in the range of my mouse. Well, the first thing is, of course, that my mouse x, and the mouse x is a built-in variable of processing again. If mouse x is bigger than, well, it needs to be bigger than, in this case, oh, sorry, I just wanted to run it. Yeah, of course, you need to return something. True. Just a quick thing. In this case, I want to see, like, okay, if my mouse x has to be between 0 and, well, the size of my button between 0 and 300. But for this button, we need to be between 300 and 600. And this one also 0 and 300, but the y position is different. So we also need to check for the y. Yeah, if this one, the y has to be between 0 and 300, and here the y between 300 and 600. So I need to use the variables within my button for that. So I can say, like, okay, if the mouse x is bigger than my x, then I'm properly within the button. And mouse x is smaller than, yeah, with the first thing I can say, like, well, it's smaller than my size, because my size was 300. But if I make the other button where my x is 300 and my size is 300, then I get a mistake. So I also need to say here, like, my x plus my size. That's actually the right point of the button. So here I do a right x position check, and then I also check for the mouse y. Is it bigger than my y? And the mouse y, is it smaller than my y plus my size? Okay. It's a bit long. Let's do this different. So like this. Okay, so I want to, in this case, I want to return a value of true because we are over it, and otherwise I need to return a value of false. Yeah, I can say, otherwise I can say, I can say else return false. The only thing is that I get now an error. Well, I get an error, another unexpected error. Let's see. Yeah, I forgot this. Parent. Okay, now it works, else it's false. Okay, good. So now I can say like, okay, if we are, if the mouse is over, then do something. So in this case I will say like, okay, if buttons 1 is mouse over, is true, to say it like that. Maybe it's more clear. Then turn the light on. So it only will turn the light on when you are when you have the mouse over there. Okay, and if I click here, nothing happens. So this will work. So you see that with this one we programmed a functionality in the button just to check if we are there with the mouse, and then based on that we turn the lights on. And otherwise we turn the light off, but well, we turn all, if we release, we turn all the lights off, or nothing at all. But well, now it's a question of structuring. Like you can say like, okay, I'm going to do this again in a for loop. So if I want to make now all the buttons active and program this for all, I start using the for loop. And then I say, replace this for current button. And when I release, I just turn, I don't have to check the mouse over even, I just turn them all off. So now I have some nice buttons.